And I don't know what makes some want to learn and others not. But I think that we're rendering a great mistake to our kids, the black kids and Latino kids, when we fall into this trap of believing that they can't learn unless they have a role model, and a role model is somebody that looks like them in order for them to learn. Now, the problem of race in America is beset by that kind of philosophy. I think that we have reached the point where we have to do something about the issue of race. And I think that what we need to do is take a chapter out of Morgan Freeman's book when he was asked by Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes, what should we do about race? And he said, stop talking about it. And Wallace said, but as a black man, how does that help solve the problem? He looked him in the eye, as Freeman can do it. He said, from now on, I'm just going to call you Mike. And you call me Morgan. Not a black man. You just call me Morgan and I'll call you Mike. If we can start looking beyond pigment, ourselves, and see the other person, as a human being, with all the flaws and capabilities of another human being. I think that's the first stage in building the foundation to get beyond race, which is a terrible waste of time, a terrible waste of energy, a betrayal of the individuality that the good Lord gave each of us. When I was being raised by Uncle James, I never suffered for love. It's tough love sometimes, but I never suffered for love. James Lewis was a man who never got beyond the 3rd grade. Born in Natchez, Mississippi, never got beyond the 3rd grade. But he had a core set of values. They were born of being raised in a very tough environment, the Deep South, at a time when the racial lines were very clearly drawn. James Lewis left the Deep South because he feared that if he remained there, he would not live very long, because he defied those lines. He often said, I'm a Maine, meaning I'm a man. And as a Maine, I want to be treated like a Maine. I remember in 1950, we drove from Sacramento, California to Natchez to attend the funeral of Uncle James's father. And I was, at the time, 11 years old. Uncle James was driving, and Aunt Bert, who is my mother's sister. Uncle James was my uncle by marriage. But he was like my father, that I never had, really. But Uncle James was driving, and we drove up to a service station. Call them filling stations then. And Uncle James was about to roll down the window, and I mean that literally, roll down the window. No push button in those days, he rolled the window down. And just as he proceeded to do that, Aunt Bert said, now you hush, James. And I was wondering, well, why is she hushing him? He hasn't said anything. And as he rolled the window down, there was a young kid, about 13, who happened to be white. And as Uncle James rolled down the window, this kid said, what do you want, boy? And I knew now why Aunt Bert was hushing him, because this Maine had just had his dignity amputated. And Uncle James kind of steeled himself, and he said, fill her up, please, sir. Here's a man in his 30s at the time, telling this 13-year-old boy, fill her up, please, sir. Those were the conditions that he was accustomed to as a black man living in the South. And I knew then, as I know now, why he left Mississippi to move to the West. Because his God-given individuality would not have served him well with the attitude he had about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We would go to a restaurant, and Aunt Bert, who was very fair. My ancestors on my mother's side were Choctaw, Irish, and French. Sort of like the United Nations in some respects. But Aunt Bert could pass. Now, for those of you that don't know that word, that means that you could pass for white. People thought you were white. Always made me wonder, if you pass for something, aren't you that? But Aunt Bert would go into the restaurant, and she would get hamburgers, knee-high sodas. I always requested grape. And she would bring them out to the car, and we would drive down to a secluded place where we would feel safe. And we would eat and drink. Because we were not welcome in the restaurants. And then we would look around to make sure that it was safe to answer nature's call. Not that we were barbarians, but the filling station had restrooms for men, women, and coloreds. The ones for coloreds were so filthy that Aunt Bert would say, we're not going to go to those. And we didn't. We would find some place secure because you felt more dignity there than in a segregated restroom. When we came back from Natchez, Mississippi, and we crossed the border into California, this man who had been treated terribly in the Deep South got out of the car and kissed the soil of California. He said, here I'm a free man. And James Lewis never took any kind of public assistance. He worked digging ditches, piling lumber, doing whatever was required to feed his family. Aunt Bert, yours truly, and himself. And he insisted that I learn the importance of having a solid work ethic. I would be outside throwing a ball against the garage door, catching it with my mitt, and he'd say, boy, do something useful. I thought I was doing something useful. I was becoming the new Willie Mays, but he'd say, do something useful. He loved his family. I'm telling you these things because I think there's something wrong, fundamentally wrong, in many of our households. And if we don't get them right, we're in for big trouble. That's what Glenn Beck's Restoring Honor was about this past Saturday. It was about trying to get back to basics. But Uncle James insisted that I be productive. Be productive, boy. He loved his family. He loved Aunt Bert. But he would never tell her. Because words were less important than your actions. Actions speak louder than words. And she would say, "James, how come you never tell me you love me?" He'd say, "Well, you know I do." She would say, "But why don't you say you love me?" "Well, you know I do." And she would say, "But you never bring me flowers." He'd say, "Hell, you got a whole backyard full of them out there." No idle gestures on his part. James Lewis hated the hyphens. When I was going through the turmoil as a UC regent, trying to fight for the principle of equal treatment for all and preferences for none, I was debating Jesse Jackson one day, and it was on television, and Uncle James watched it, and Jackson was talking about the condition of African Americans. And Uncle James said, "Boy, you ain't never been to Africa and you ain't going." And he would say, "You're just a Maine." He was a patriot, too. I remember watching the Olympics, and you know how at the end of each event, they bring three up to the podium, and the gold medalist is standing in the center, and silver is on one side, and the bronze is on the other. Well, a young black kid had just annihilated his competition and had won the 440-yard dash, and he was standing looking off into the horizon, and they were playing the national anthem. He was just looking off into the horizon, and Uncle James yells at the TV and he says, "Put your damn hand on your heart, boy." You know, we sometimes are reluctant nowadays. I don't know if we feel embarrassed or what, but we're reluctant in a public setting to acknowledge the country and to put our hand on our heart. We won't stop what we're doing to acknowledge that our national anthem is being played. There's a certain, you don't want to feel hokey, I guess. You don't want to feel corny. So you keep doing, we keep doing what we're doing, rather than recognizing that an important moment is occurring. If you love the country, you stop what you're doing and acknowledge that moment. Whatever James Lewis was doing, he was never too embarrassed to show his love of the country. And I often wondered, how is it that a man who grew up in the Deep South was treated like garbage in the Deep South, moves to California and exhibits such love of his country? What causes that? Why isn't he bitter? What causes him to identify with the best of the country, to be such a patriot? And I think, and I don't know, I never talked to him about it, because he was a man of few words. But I think it was because of this God-given appreciation of who he was as a man and where he was as an American.